She walked into the first-class lounge with nothing but a boarding pass and quiet confidence. Minutes later, she was being escorted out by security, not for anything she did, but because of who she was. What the airline didn't know, she held the power to cost them $5 billion. Stay with us. This is the story they'll never forget. Dear viewer, what you are about to witness is not just a story. It is a powerful testament to the quiet power and pursuit of justice in places most people ignore. If this is your first time here, I warmly invite you to share where you are watching in the comments below. And if stories like this move, challenge you, or make you think, consider subscribing and clicking the bell icon. We share voices that deserve to be heard every day. Thank you for being here. Now let's get into the story. Camille Hartley stepped into JFK International's first-class lounge with the poise of someone accustomed to power. But this afternoon, her presence rippled across the marble floors like a sudden gust of wind. She wasn't flashy, no designer suit, no ostentatious jewelry, just a tailored navy coat, sleek pumps, and a quiet confidence forged through years at the helm of Trevera Holdings. She carried nothing more conspicuous than a slim laptop bag and a printed boarding pass tucked beside her phone. But in that moment, as she crossed the threshold, the air shifted. Soft lighting glinted off gold-trimmed furnishings and plush leather armchairs. Champagne glasses sparkled on low tables. The elite murmured in low tones. The staff ducked eyes. And then Camille walked in her stride, deliberate, her gaze steady. Something in her calm unsettled the space. Half-glimpsed gazes flickered between curiosity and suspicion. Who did she think she was sitting amidst royalty in that lounge? She offered a polite nod to the concierge. No fanfare, no announcement. But her ticket said everything. First-class seat, 1A priority lounge access. It was all there. Still, when she scanned her pass at the attendant, his eyes hesitated as if his mind was suddenly arguing with his fingertips. The ticket read, Hartley C., in bold, crisp letters. In that instant, everything should have went smoothly. And yet the charged silence in the room told her otherwise. She didn't belong here, not in everyone else's eyes. Camille settled into one of the lounge's best seats, reporting the latest financial documents on screen, preparing for a high-stakes call en route to Newark and then on to Seattle. A meeting awaited her, a boardroom discussion with Atlas Airways leadership. 2 days earlier, Lyra Capital Partners, the firm she'd led to historic growth, had proposed a $5 billion conditional investment in Atlas. It was a gamble for change, journeying through turbulent airspace toward a just cause. But the meeting today wasn't supposed to start with interrogation. Why then did the lounge feel like a storm center? A soft whir of surveillance cameras, subtle shifts in body language. Fellow travelers whispered, diverted their eyes when they encountered hers. She leaned over, straightening her documents, and thought, this starts now. Just then, a man in a crisp black suit paused by her seat. Excuse me? He said, in a voice edged with protocol. Could you follow me, ma'am? The formality felt heavy, like the sound of a gavel dropped hard in a courtroom. She looked up, her heart steady, but her mind racing. She gave a polite nod and closed her laptop without a word. The man, a senior airport security agent named Dustin Shaw, led her toward a private area off lounge, glances trailing them like dark clouds gathering. Her calm voice was measured and clear. I do not owe anyone an explanation, she said quietly. But I am more than happy to show my ticket and ID. He didn't answer. He had no grounds, no hostile behavior, no suspicious items. nothing on his database. All he had was the unspoken rule of the lounge. If you look different, you must explain yourself. They arrived at the small security holding area, its beige walls cheap and unnerving. An empty row of chairs, a scanner, and a cold metal table, no audience now, but it was still a theater of power. On the other side of the door, steps echoed as more agents joined. In their professional buzz, she could feel assumptions leaning against her. Two uniformed guards stood behind Dustin. The formal security manager, Deborah Lynch, joined them. She carried the weight of years in uniform. Her posture disciplined, her eyes cautious. She wore a name badge, and underneath the lapel of her crisp black jacket, she kept a radio with authority inscribed in each click and hum. Lynch looked at Camille's boarding pass with narrowed eyes. "Ms. Hartley, could you please come with me for a brief security check?" She sounded polite, but her tone hovered somewhere above polite and below polite enough. Her words were neutral, but the meaning was clear. "We think you don't belong." Camille took a breath without flinching. "I've already shown my ticket. My documents are in order." Deborah looked away, distracted by her phone. "Standard procedure," she said almost to herself. "If you'll just wait here, we'll be with you shortly." Camille nodded again, the cool control in her expression rippling across the room. She sat down slowly, folding her hands inside her coat. She looked entirely composed, nothing signifying rage or panic, but a calm distillation of purpose. In that moment, she was both the eye and the storm. Minutes stretched, tension magnified. Staff and travelers formed a silent ring of voyeurs. You could hear a pin drop, despite the flight announcements, the hum of conversations. The scene pulsed with a single question. Why is this happening? Camille thought of her grandparents, preacher and teacher, who taught her that dignity was an exercise of defiance. She had flown to JFK countless times, but never with such scrutiny. Not even visa checks, not even random upgrades. This felt different. It smoldered with assumption, with invisible bias. As someone who had broken glass ceilings from Wall Street to global finance, she hadn't realized how low the ceiling still hovered. Inside her bag, hidden from view, she carried her weapon. Her phone equipped with an app designed to activate her emergency channels, to alert her legal team, to notify the executives at Lyra, to record any misconduct. Truth was her ally. If she was being pulled off for protocol, so be it. If it was prejudice, she would expose it. The door to the lounge clicked open. More uniformed personnel stepped in, all drawn to the storm. She looked up. No fear, only calm. She whispered under her breath, "Documented." The hallway brightened as agents filed through. In a gesture that felt ceremonial, Deborah Lynch motioned to her, "Ms. Hartley, please come with us." It didn't sound like a request. It sounded like expectation. It was the kind of quiet escalation that cuts deeper than shouting. It was a storm cloaked in dignity. As Camille stood, the luxury of first class shimmered just behind her, but now gilded with tension. Behind her footsteps, whispers trailed off. And in that charged moment, she knew one truth. This flight would not end until the storm had revealed its shape. The walk down the sterile corridor felt longer than it was. With every click of her heels against the cold tiles, Camille Hartley carried more than a briefcase. She carried the weight of every silent judgment that had shadowed her steps through years of climbing corporate ladders that weren't built for her. Two uniformed officers flanked her, neither saying a word. It wasn't protocol they were executing. It was prejudice cloaked in politeness and perfumed with bureaucracy. Inside the private security room, a metallic chill hung in the air. A table, a pair of plastic chairs, and a two-way mirror told her this wasn't a place for passengers. It was an accusation disguised as formality. Camille placed her bag down, gently the calm in her movements, a calculated contrast to the anxiety others hoped to project onto her. One officer stood stiffly at the door, while the other took a clipboard and began reading through standard questions, his voice monotone, but edged with the subtle disbelief that someone like her could really belong in first class. Name Camille Hartley, she answered without pause. Destination Seattle. Purpose of travel business. A brief glance passed between the two men. The questions grew increasingly redundant, as if they were circling, searching for a flaw to justify this intrusion. Camille's expression never changed. Her silence wasn't passive, it was principled. She had answered with clarity and authority. Still, her presence alone wasn't enough. Or rather, it was too much. The officer flipped through her ticket again. "And how did you obtain this seat?" His tone shifted ever so slightly, not quite accusatory, but infused with something sharper skepticism, the kind reserved for people who weren't supposed to be sitting in power. Camille smiled, but not with amusement, with purpose. "I booked it the same way anyone else does, with money and a reason to be there." He looked away, murmuring to the second officer. But Camille wasn't listening. She was thinking, not of this room, not of their questions, but of the moment earlier when she'd seen the flight manifest. A familiar name had caught her eye: Colton Graves, Chief Operating Officer of Atlas Airways. She'd encountered him during a previous negotiation, a man of polished charm and private bias, a man who'd once smirked across a conference table and asked if she was someone's assistant. The memory made her sit straighter. He was on this flight. She wondered now if this theater had been staged for an audience. The security manager, Deborah Lynch, entered without knocking. She folded her arms and surveyed Camille with the cold precision of someone who believed their uniform bestowed moral superiority. She didn't sit. She hovered. Her questions were few, but loaded. "Are you affiliated with any high-level individuals in Atlas Airways?" Camille's eyes narrowed. "Why would that be relevant to my travel plans?" Deborah didn't flinch. "We're verifying some concerns raised by staff in the first-class lounge." Camille raised an eyebrow. "Concerns based on what behavior that appeared unfitting for the lounge." Deborah paused, then added, "We're not accusing you. This is a routine check." Camille said nothing for a beat, then leaned forward. "You're calling my composure suspicious, my silence threatening, my simplicity deceptive, and you're hiding behind the word routine like it absolves you." The room fell still. Deborah's jaw clenched, but she turned to the officers. "We're done here. Let her rejoin boarding." As they left, Camille reached into her bag and tapped a button on her phone, an encrypted app designed to flag an internal event log. Everything had been recorded. She didn't plan to retaliate, not yet. This wasn't vengeance. It was evidence. Back at the gate, a hush fell over the area as Camille returned. No one clapped. No one apologized, but everyone noticed. She walked past them with regal silence. Her shoulders squared, her gaze steady. Some turned away. Others stared. She had been publicly questioned, and still she walked like a woman with nothing to hide, because she didn't. As boarding was called, Camille waited patiently, even as the agents hesitated to announce her group. She held her pass a little higher. This time, looked the attendant in the eye and said clearly, "Seat 1A." She stepped down the jet bridge without a glance back. Yet even as the plane's door closed behind her, the real confrontation had just begun. Not with agents, not even with Atlas, but with a system so steeped in subtle bias that it didn't need to shout to diminish someone, it only needed to look and assume. Camille Hartley wasn't just going to sit quietly now. She had watched, she had recorded, and soon she would act not out of rage, but out of righteous clarity. The seat they tried to take from her wasn't just leather and legroom, it was a symbol. And symbols once defended hold power that cannot be erased. This flight had taken off, but the landing would belong to her. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft amber hue as the aircraft reached cruising altitude. The quiet hum of the engines provided a steady rhythm, but Camille Hartley's mind raced with a different frequency, sharp-focused and deliberate. She sat with the poise of someone unfazed by turbulence, external or otherwise. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that they had just triggered a sequence of events far beyond the scope of a routine flight. They'd looked at her and seen a disruption. What they missed was the quiet architect of a storm. From her seat in 1A, Camille unzipped her bag and retrieved a sleek black tablet. She entered a secure code and opened the internal audit interface for VentureMark Group, the powerful financial consortium she led. Her screen lit up with confidential data, the ongoing ethical evaluations of Atlas Airways, including performance audits, cultural assessments, and service integrity metrics. But today, a new tab had been initiated: Onboard Discrimination Review, Level 3. She began typing, not emotionally, but clinically. Every interaction, from the first-class lounge to the interrogation room, was entered with timestamps, names, and behavior descriptors. She attached footage, discrete recordings, from her clothing's integrated micro camera, capturing every word exchanged between her and Deborah Lynch, the officers, and even the murmuring agents at the gate. Camille knew this wasn't about her ego or personal vindication. It was about the system, how it operated, who it protected, and how it could be brought into the light. A rustle nearby broke her focus. A flight attendant, tall, polished, and evidently briefed, appeared at her side. He offered a forced smile. "Would you like something to drink, Ms. Hartley?" It was the first time anyone had said her name on this flight. "Water, please," she said quietly. As he turned away, Camille caught sight of a passenger across the aisle, a woman with a glittering diamond watch and a tablet open to stock performance charts. She had stared at Camille when she boarded. Her eyes had narrowed with the unmistakable look of judgment. Now she avoided Camille's gaze, entirely pretending to scroll. Camille turned back to her own screen. She opened a video message draft and recorded a short log entry, beginning internal analysis on Atlas Airways for critical compliance breach in customer dignity protocol. Subjective mistreatment of a qualified passenger in priority class will serve as a benchmark for escalation protocol. Final report due within 72 hours. Advisory Council will be looped in upon landing. She paused, her finger hovering over the save button, and took a breath. Then she remembered something. Just before she left for this trip, she had signed a critical clause in VentureMark's ongoing merger support with Atlas Airways, a $5 billion liquidity injection to stabilize operations over the next fiscal year. The clause contained a discretionary ethics override, meaning Camille's team could pause or revoke funding if they uncovered misconduct affecting core corporate values. It had been a safeguard, one she never thought would be activated under her own first-hand witness. until now. Camille closed the tablet. She didn't need to do anything more at this moment. The report was already in motion. What mattered now was what came next. The human layer, the ripple through perception, through reputation. Hours later, the captain's voice crackled overhead, announcing their descent into Seattle. As passengers adjusted their seats and reached for their belongings, Camille remained still, hands folded neatly over her lap. The landing wouldn't just be physical, it would be symbolic. For her, this flight represented more than just a journey. It marked the turning point in a much larger fight, a fight against invisibility. As they taxied toward the gate, Camille heard hushed tones in the galley up front. Her name had clearly made its rounds among the staff. She caught words like review executive and VIP, but she didn't react. Let them guess. Let them wonder what kind of influence she held. By the time they realized, it would already be too late to backpedal. When the doors finally opened, Camille stepped into the jet bridge, with her head held high. She was met by a woman in a dark gray suit holding a tablet and wearing the pin of Atlas Airways Corporate. The woman's smile was tight and her eyes nervous. Ms. Hartley, I've been asked to personally escort you to the arrivals lounge, she said. Camille simply nodded. They walked through the terminal in silence, passing by hurried travelers, unaware that something far greater than a flight delay was unfolding in real time. The quiet between them was broken only when the corporate representative added, I just want to say on behalf of Atlas that we're looking into what happened earlier. Camille stopped walking. She turned to face the woman fully, and for the first time since stepping on the plane, her voice carried with it the full measure of her authority. No. You're not looking into it, she said. You're already being investigated, and I suggest you take that very seriously. The woman paled. Camille walked on, not as a passenger, not as a target, but as a catalyst. What happened at the airport was not an isolated error. It was a reflection, and Camille Hartley was determined to hold the mirror steady until the entire world saw what she had seen. The power they didn't see was already reshaping everything they thought they could control. As Camille Hartley entered the executive lounge at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, the atmosphere was markedly different from the one she had left behind hours earlier. Gone were the cold glares, the hushed murmurs, and the assumption-laced scrutiny. Here silence wasn't suspicion, it was anticipation. 3 men in sharp suits and 1 woman in a navy dress rose to greet her, but no one reached out to shake hands. The gravity of what she represented had finally settled in. A private door clicked shut behind them, sealing off the room from curious eyes. On one side of the long glass table sat Atlas Airways General Counsel, their VP of Operations, a senior security officer, and an external advisor from their PR agency. On the other side sat Camille alone, but commanding more weight than all of them combined. No one introduced themselves. No pleasantries were exchanged. Camille placed a slim leather folder on the table and opened it with methodical calm. Inside were documents embossed with the seal of VentureMark Group, but more importantly, the original signed clause granting her authority over their ongoing merger bailout. She didn't need to speak for anyone in the room to feel the shift in power. We're aware of what happened earlier. The VP began his tone deliberately neutral. And we deeply regret any mistreatment. We've already begun an internal review. Camille looked at him for a long moment before responding. Regret is reactive. This situation demands accountability. She slid a USB drive across the table. The PR executive reached for it tentatively. That drive contains high-resolution footage of your staff's conduct. In the lounge, at security, on board. It includes audio, facial recognition, timestamps. None of it is speculative. You may begin watching it now, or wait until federal regulators request it during formal proceedings. A heavy silence followed. No one touched the drive. Ms. Hartley, the general counsel, said carefully, "What exactly are you requesting?" Camille didn't smile. She didn't lean back or dramatize her next words. Her delivery was calm, but laced with an edge that made even the air feel sharper. "I'm not requesting anything. I'm advising." She paused only to let her words settle. "I advise that your board immediately suspend Deborah Lynch and all staff complicit in the discriminatory treatment I endured. I advise that you halt all public-facing PR until your leadership formally acknowledges systemic failure. And I advise you to prepare for immediate audit escalations that could impact not only your financial stability, but your federal certifications as a carrier." The PR advisor leaned forward, attempting a softer approach. "With all due respect, Ms. Hartley, we're eager to make this right. But perhaps we can agree on a resolution that avoids further reputational risk." Camille held up a hand, not to interrupt, but to end the line of thinking entirely. "Stop," she said. "This isn't about optics. This is about how your culture treats people like me, quiet, composed, qualified, but black. What happened today wasn't a glitch. It was a feature of your system. And I'm here to rewrite that code." For the first time, none of them looked directly at her. The VP stared down at his notes. The counsel tapped her pen. The PR advisor shifted in his seat. "You mistook me for a problem?" Camille continued, her voice firm. "You saw an inconvenience, a woman who didn't fit. But I wasn't your problem. I was your test." She leaned forward, "And you failed." She didn't raise her voice, but the impact of her words was seismic. In that room, titles and salaries meant nothing. Camille Hartley wasn't a passenger anymore. She was the evaluator, the judge, and the potential executioner of their financial future. The silence that followed wasn't just discomfort, it was dread. "I could have walked away," she said softly. "I could have boarded that plane, endured the humiliation, and filed a formal complaint like any other passenger. But I didn't. Because I wasn't sent here to be quiet. I was sent to witness, to observe what happens when no one's watching, or so you think." She stood slowly gathering her documents without hurry. "You'll receive the official findings within 72 hours. Your funding," she paused, her gaze locking on the VP, "will depend on how quickly and sincerely you act." She reached the door, then turned one final time. "I'm not here to punish," she said. "I'm here to make sure no one else has to prove they belong in a seat they've already paid for." And with that, Camille walked out, not to applause, not to confrontation, but to a stunned stillness. Behind her, 4 seasoned executives sat frozen, finally realizing the woman they had interrogated and dismissed wasn't an interloper in first class. She was the one who had written the rules for the seat assignments. And now she was rewriting the rules entirely. The fallout didn't wait for the headlines to break. It erupted within hours. By morning, the walls of Atlas Airways' corporate headquarters in Manhattan echoed with frantic phone calls, closed-door meetings, and damage control briefings. Camille Hartley's name wasn't just known, it was feared. Her internal audit findings had spread like wildfire, bypassing PR filters and landing directly on the desks of federal regulators, investors, and media outlets. The $5 billion in restructuring funds, VentureMark Group had been negotiating essential to Atlas Airways' survival, was no longer pending. It was frozen. Camille Hartley had invoked the values breach clause in the agreement, citing documented ethical misconduct and systemic bias. It wasn't just money lost, it was the airline's reputation, trust, and future. In boardrooms across the country, companies began whispering about the Hartley Protocol. A new term, a new standard, a warning. Inside Atlas, the consequences were immediate. Deborah Lynch, the security chief who had initiated the discriminatory profiling, was escorted out by HR within 24 hours. Her badge revoked, her pension under review. Sarah Colton, the lead flight attendant who had humiliated Camille in front of passengers, was reassigned to regional duty under probation pending a formal investigation. But even the staff who hadn't spoken up, the ones who had silently stood by, some of them faced disciplinary action too. The new policy was clear. Complicity was not neutrality, and silence was no longer safe. Camille watched the unfolding from a quiet office overlooking Lake Washington, where the skyline mirrored the clarity of her mission. She hadn't celebrated. There was no victory dance, no vindictive pleasure. What she felt was heavier, a burden of clarity, a recognition that this battle, while personal, had become symbolic. Her quiet defiance had triggered a reckoning far beyond her own circumstances. When asked by VentureMark's senior board if she'd consider making a public statement, Camille had simply said, "Let the actions speak. Let the silence of their empty gates speak louder." The airline's losses weren't only financial. Passengers began canceling tickets. Celebrities and influencers who had witnessed or heard of the incident used their platforms to speak out. Industry watchdogs called for independent audits. FAA officials launched a formal inquiry. In just 3 days, Atlas Airways went from a brand on the cusp of rebirth to a symbol of corporate rot. But perhaps the most profound shift happened within Camille herself. The woman who had been profiled, questioned, belittled, and removed from her seat had now transformed that injustice into a cultural pivot. Her story became required reading in leadership workshops. University business schools analyzed her response as a case study in silent power and ethical influence. Camille hadn't changed how she dressed or spoke or moved through the world. She didn't adopt new armor to avoid the next storm. She remained entirely herself, poised, thoughtful, reserved, because her strength wasn't a reaction to how she was treated. It was who she was all along. Weeks later, Camille returned to the same airport, the same lounge. She was there for a different audit, but the energy had changed. Employees she passed bowed their heads not out of fear, but out of recognition. The lessons from her first encounter had become etched into the organization's bones. Bias training had evolved from check-the-box modules into immersive simulations. Hiring practices had been revised. Promotion systems now included equity audits. As Camille walked past the lounge check-in, the young agent stood a little straighter. "Ms. Hartley, welcome back," she said with quiet reverence. "Thank you for everything." Camille simply nodded and kept walking. She didn't need grand gestures. The world didn't need another speech. What it needed was change, seated deep and left to grow. But change, she knew, wasn't enough without memory. Which is why, before boarding her flight, she paused for a moment just outside the gate. Not to relive the humiliation she had endured, but to acknowledge what that moment had unlocked, the truth that had been forced into the open, the transformation that followed. This wasn't a story about $5 billion. It was about the unseen cost of bias, the price of arrogance, the power of restraint. For Atlas Airways, the scandal would forever define their brand story. But for the passengers, the workers, the executives, and everyone who watched this unfold, the lesson burned deeper. Never assume silence equals weakness. And never mistake quiet confidence for permission. Camille Hartley hadn't walked into that airport just to catch a flight. She walked in to change the altitude of justice, and she left not as a passenger, but as the compass. In the story of Camille Hartley, what began as an ordinary first-class check-in transformed into a stunning exposé of racial bias, unchecked power, and the quiet resilience of a woman who chose dignity over confrontation. Her journey wasn't just through the terminal gates or onto an aircraft. It was through the deeply ingrained systems that often fail to see the worth of someone who doesn't fit a mold. Camille didn't enter that airport dressed in designer labels or surrounded by personal assistants. She didn't flash her wealth, her status, or her authority. She walked in as herself, a calm, composed black woman carrying a first-class ticket and the integrity of her own presence. Yet what she faced was suspicion, condescension, and eventually removal from a seat she rightfully owned. And all because some chose to see only the color of her skin, not the power of her character. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't imagine, was who she truly was. Camille Hartley wasn't just another traveler. She was the gatekeeper of a $5 billion decision. A woman who held within her briefcase and within her legal rights the future of the airline itself. And when the people who humiliated her were forced to sit in the very rooms they once ruled, watching footage of their own discriminatory behavior, justice wasn't delivered with rage, it was handed down with grace, clarity, and consequences. Camille's story isn't just about one airline, one mistake, or one act of discrimination. It is a powerful reflection of what happens when courage meets injustice and when silence is replaced with strength. This tale reminds us that true power doesn't always need a microphone or a spotlight. Sometimes it's hidden behind quiet resolve, behind eyes that choose not to scream, but to record, behind footsteps that do not march in protest, but walk with purpose. Camille's power wasn't in her title. It was in her unwavering sense of justice, her refusal to be provoked, her commitment to truth, and her understanding of timing turned what could have been a forgotten moment of bias into a global reckoning. So what can we learn from Camille Hartley? We learn that discrimination often wears a polished uniform, that it doesn't always shout, it whispers through glances, procedures, and policies designed to exclude. And we learn that dismantling it doesn't always require rage. Sometimes it requires documentation, patience, and the strength to let the truth speak louder than emotion. We also learn something even more personal, that how we treat others reveals more about our own character than theirs. Whether we're in a position of power or simply a bystander, our response to injustice defines the kind of world we're helping to build. And for those who have ever been looked down upon, dismissed, or underestimated, remember Camille. Let her remind you that no one has the right to tell you where you don't belong. You define your worth. And if you stay grounded in it, no system, no bias, no gatekeeper can take it from you. In a time where division often makes the loudest noise, Camille's story is a call for clarity, not chaos, for action rooted in honor, not vengeance. Her quiet rebellion was proof that the most profound changes often come from those who refuse to play by a broken set of rules. If Camille Hartley's journey moved you opened your eyes or inspired you to rethink the way we view others, then share this story. Let it echo in boardrooms, classrooms, lounges, and homes. And if you believe more stories like this need to be told, raw, powerful, and human, then please subscribe to this channel. Your support gives us the motivation to continue uncovering the truths that matter and to keep shining a light on the moments that spark real change. Thank you for listening. Let's keep the conversation going and the justice rising.